Cameron Carpenter at his home in Berlin with his home organ, so to say. Why is Berlin now your home?
Well, I fell in love with Berlin about 3 years ago, and it makes a great deal of sense as an artist to live here, but especially for what I'm doing with the future touring organ, which will be launched in 2014. It's a very good base for that because it's so central to Europe and to Asia, and yet it's very close for me to be working in America, which I do about half the time. And in addition to which, Berlin is, of course, as most people know by now, an incredibly rich, culturally rich.
And it's inspiring, Berlin.
No, definitely not.
Not?
I don't believe in inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Inspiration for me is a kind of, somehow a little bit fake or a little amateur concept. Berlin is energizing. We want to live in a place that supports us. Berlin, for me, it certainly does.
Mm-hmm. Now let's come to your instrument here. Is the organ for you kind of a wild animal you have to tame?
The organ for me is a resource. I would not describe it as a wild animal, because a wild animal is something that has a character of its own that has to be overcome and instructed. Now, of course, in many cases, the pipe organ is indeed a wild animal. My ideal for the organ, though, is that we tame the organ universally by giving the organ digitally a kind of consistency that is afforded to the players of the piano, for instance. And so, is the organ a wild animal? At the moment it is, in a sense. But I think on a case-by-case basis, the instrument has a certain promise, which is just beginning to be revealed.
Now, could we hear something, a small piece of your improvisation, please?
Oh, it would be my pleasure.
Cameron Carpenter, how did you come to the organ? As a little boy?
Yes.
Already?
When I was 4, I saw a picture in an encyclopedia of a person playing the organ, and not in a church but in a cinema, where there used to be a tradition of very dramatic, cinematic organs which were sort of conceived of as representing the orchestra in some way. And these organs flourished briefly in the 1920s as a secular, a sort of secular variant of the traditional organ. And they looked so different. There was this picture of this man with a mustache and a sort of elegant white tie and this silver screen behind him playing in this theater on this enormously elaborate and beautifully carved organ. And it was such a dramatic thing. There was some aspect of that presented itself as a vision to me and which gave me a sense, which I still have.
So your parents had to buy you an organ, a Hammond organ?
That's exactly what they did. They bought me a Hammond organ. And that was a fitting sort of metaphor, or perhaps a precedent for what was to follow, because of course the Hammond organ is not only a variant of the various genres of organ building, but was originally intended as an alternative to the pipe organ itself. And it also, of course, gave me the appreciation for the idea of the instantaneous action possible, particularly on the electronic and digital organs, which is an instant gratification, literally, of one's own musical desires, which you don't have on any other instrument.
No?
I don't think so, because the organ is the only instrument that removes its player from the energy which is being used to create the musical impact, since all of that energy comes from electricity, which is true in the pipe organ as well.
And you started playing piano?
I started the organ and the piano at the same
yes.
time.
And you played the wohltemperierte Klavier by Bach very early in your life?
Exactly. That was one of the early musical influences, as was the piano music of Scott Joplin. Scott Joplin, in a way, was the first classical music that I played.
In the age of 16, you did something which I admire very much. You took Mahlers' Fifth Symphony.
Exactly, yeah.
And put the whole symphony for the old organ.
Yes, I transcribed it, you might say.
Why?
I also like to say that I transpired it.
Yes.
Well, why did I do it? I did it because I was obsessed with the music. People often ask me, why? But of course, it's the most obvious thing in the world if you stop to think about it, that the amount of work required to transcribe that work, as with many others, but especially that one, is so enormous that one would have to be totally consumed with the music. But the point of all that, of course, is not the form or the origin or what he was studying. It's the transcendent and overwhelming, high, rejoicing clarity of the great ideas of the fabulous mind of this man. And that's what I wanted to be able to play. And you see, that's one of the things that I've gotten sometimes from organ music, but mostly from other music. And so for me, organ music is music that I play on the organ.
And you transcribe a lot of other compositions.
Yes, I do.
For your instrument.
That's right. Much piano music, music from film. Of course, recently I've got into the string music of Bach. I adore Bach's organ works. Of course, I play Bach's complete organ works, but I have to say that I don't feel that Bach's organ music is necessarily his most interesting music. It's very often the most interesting music to play, but I question whether it's always as interesting to listen to. Whereas many of the violin works, the chaconne, for instance, the third partita, and of course I'm experimenting now also with the cello suites.
And another transcription was Lied, the Erlkönig by Schubert.
Yes, that's right. me, especially in America, I'm often performing that Erlkönig or one of the other songs, for instance, from Frauen lieben Leben. I've also transcribed some things. But juxtaposing that with Gershwin or with Ives and with music by Leonard Cohen, for instance. And so that's very important for me, because this kind of storytelling, it's more about what is evoked by the given piece of music and what that turns on to me than even the idea of the composer or the period that it's from.
And in the critics they write, it's marvelous how Cameron Carpenter plays Chopin, for example. What the piano player plays with his left hand, you played with your feet.
You know, the idea for me, at least, is that the organ should be played with the entire body. Of course, it's played with the whole mind, as much of the mind as we can sum it up and marshal. But of course, my idea is also to try to raise my body to higher technical abilities. So I want to be able to play with my feet as freely as I can with my hands.
Now you come to Heidelberg, to the music festival Heidelberger Frühling.
With great anticipation.
And you play in the Heidelberg Stadthalle Congress Hall.
That's right.
And you don't know the organ there.
My gut feeling is that just as I don't announce programs in advance, I really feel that it's very important not only for each program to be to some degree customized for the place, but it's important for me to arrive and get a sense of that place and what I feel best to present there.
So we have to wait for the inspiration you feel when you come to Heidelberg?
What we should wait for is simply what happens, and the event of a person playing in the first place for the first time, in a place for the first time, and trying to give of the best which is within them, which is what I will be doing.